Howdy, all you delicious people. I'm here today to review Upgrade. So, I went and I saw this film, and then seemingly years later, I went on and watched a movie called Implanted. And I was like, okay, Implanted feels just like this film. And so I went back and I decided like, okay, how about I rewatch this film? I actually really like it. It's a kind of a revenge film, but it also has this kind of mystery kind of vibe to it because we have the detective in this story who is trying to figure out Detective Cortez is trying to figure out how exactly our main character Gray is to be murdering people while supposedly being a quadriplegic, which is to basically be a guy who's to be held onto a wheelchair and cannot be able to move his body. And so it's a kind of interesting story, not taken from the perspective of the detective, but of course taken from the perspective of the main character who is to be Gray, who is to go on and seek his revenge from an accident of which that he had had. Not only an accident, but then on top of that, a violent killing right afterwards. And so Gray is to be driven, like slowly but surely driven to the point of him murdering and killing numerous people. And then it's to consistently be this trail of breadcrumbs leading him back to find out who the guy behind it all really is, or if there is a behind it all, behind the curtain kind of guy. And so I thought that this movie was really good. Where could you go out of your way to say that you've seen this film? Because more than likely people might be interested in doing so. Well, immediately I will tell you that it's not an easy task to watch this film, but you can probably Google search if you are to go onto certain apps. You can probably Google search an app called Letter C Movies. So C Movies, it's two words, and or one letter and and another word after that. So two words technically with one being a letter. So you can go onto this app and basically pretty much be able to see next to almost anything, with the exclusion of some kind of random. Like if you kind of exhaust the search engine, you should probably bump into a wall somewhere where you like won't be able to easily be able to watch something. But you can also go into other apps like Fox HD Movies. If you search that into Google engine, you come up with an app that there in fact says Fox HD Movies, but like the title will say something different. It'll say like 10 play 1080p HD movies or whichever. Um, that app, I believe, right now to the current of the second it's recording, doesn't have an easy ability to be able to watch this movie, but it's still on there. But because eventually there's going to possibly be a link at some point in time to watch this movie. There's also other like apps like TV Crush or something like that. You can. There's a bunch of apps that I've kind of listed for you to go out of your way to say that you've seen, so that way you can download uh, these things to watch these movies for absolutely free. Basically, once you get a combination of certain apps together, you can basically watch anything and watch it a lot quicker than you would probably be able to if you were to have a common day to day app. Because, anyways, pushing on. So there's all the things right there. I think you could probably rent this also if you have the means, if you have the wallet, or if you've already bought this X amount of time ago and you're like, hey, I want to recheck this movie out because I remember this too. So So yeah, thoroughly enjoyed this film. Go ahead and check it out if you never have. And also possibly go and check out Implanted, but I would check out this movie first. Just because you'll probably just be like, out of the two, comparatively saying, like, this movie is just hands down a better film. So, with that said, let's go out of our way to say that it's that customary double five time territory because it's about that time, yet again, to go into spoiler time. Spoiler time, it's about that time again to spoil this movie. I kind of did a weak teeing it up like thing, but really it's a revenge movie that it's good. Believe me, it's a good movie. How good is based on your own opinion because you'll probably say that this movie might have sucked, or you might have said that this movie, yeah, it's yeah, one of these, a crisp one of these. Yeah, you might feel that way. So let's go out of our way to go into this thing called spoiler time. Spoiler time. It's about that time again to spoil this movie. Almost forgot my signature weird, goofy cheerleading, weird, goofy thing that I do here. So, beginning of this film, we have our main character, Gray, who is to be this mechanic who is to be a fixer of a car of sorts that is to be a Trans Am in a time of which that there is to be these like smart cars that drive themselves. And it seems we have a futuristic movie that is to try and pull back and not be so futuristic. So there's kind of this back and forth thing about it, where we have both Gray and the detective that is to be in this movie, uh, who are both wanting to have that old fashioned feel. And I don't blame them because really, like a lot of people would want to stick to like I would much rather watch a movie off of a disc than on a streaming thing. But like heaven forbid you can buy every single disc in the world too. So, but there's some stuff that you could buy off of a DVD and Blu-ray that doesn't exist on a streaming thing somewhere. So like there's that kind of tug and pull of just like, well, hey, I have this and it's nowhere, and so why not just pop in the disc and just watch it because like I've been meaning to go back to this anyways. So, and Upgrade was one of those where I do have the discs because it was good. It was so good. I liked it. I think I got it for like Christmas one year because it was like one of those where I'm like, I really want to see this movie. Like I'm so excited to see it. I want to see it somehow. And so I got it for I think Christmas because there was not a whole lot of places to get it. So because it was like there was no streaming place that had it. It was like that's the huge inconvenience of like years ago when streaming wasn't as important as it is now, where you can kind of find everything. Plus, I didn't know all the convenient stuff that I have now to watch seemingly anything. So, little backstory. So, old fashioned feel. So, Gray is to go and repair this car, and I guess is to offer this car to a guy named Aaron, who is to, of course, like certain kind of cars, Trans Am of sorts, which Gray is to put together here. So the beginning of this movie kind of feels like the Jason Statham film Death Race, but just the beginning part of it. Then it goes off and is its eventual own thing, but it just kind of starts off this way. So Gray is to, and plus also this has like an iRobot kind of feel where like Gray is kind of like the Will Smith character that wants to kind of do everything again, like without like technology giving him a leg up. Because Asha is to go on to make her way home, and Gray is to kind of hug her and like, hey, it's okay that you're wearing like the pants of the family and stuff like that, but I can always figure out a way to take those pants off. So Asha and Gray, like Gray is to like go like, hey, do you want a pizza? And Asha's like, well, hey, do you want to like print one out? Like as if we're, hey guys, want to print out a computer? Yeah, it's a paper. Ugh. How can you print out a pizza? That sounds so weird, but I guess that's what they say in this film. And so Ash is to say, hey, can we print out a pizza? And Gray is like, well, can we just make one? And she's like, that's a lot of work. It's like, really? Wouldn't you think if you were to do anything to put together a pizza, it would be this thing called work? You think? So, not to insult these people, but so Gray is to mention that he is to go to drop off this car to this guy named Aaron, and that Asha should go along with him because she'll probably like who this guy is. So Gray and Asha go off to make it to Aaron's weird kind of underground house, which is really interesting. And so, because of course it is, because it's kind of like a underground house, which is kind of weird. He has these huge, massive things of stairs, which I'm like, how is it like? Man, you gotta really. Hopefully, nothing goes horribly wrong with Aaron, and he has to make it up those mountain of stairs for whatever reason. So Gray is to have Asha come with him because they're going to drop off this car, and so they're going to go into the drive it yourself car that follows them there. So they go and they meet Aaron, and Aaron is to put together his own cloud. He has an actual cloud right in front of him that he's supposedly controlling. And so Ash is like, hey, what do you got there? And he's like, and Aaron's like, oh, it's my cloud. So now Ash is to realize that this guy is to be Aaron, the guy who is to be running this other company that seems to uh, be this massive money making thing. And Ash is like, well, hey, I run this kind of smaller company called Cobalt, and like we're trying to like really progress, but it's kind of like nowhere near where your company is. And so Aaron is like, well, hey, like, yeah, your company is never going to really progress. Like, and I can show you exactly how. And so Aaron all of a sudden is going and having them go off to show them like his next gizmo, his next gadget. I'm like, should he be doing that with a competitor? Like, should he be not showing this to a competitor technically? Because this girl could go and see his latest gadget and just like, hey, company, like this is the latest and greatest secret that this guy has. You better go and steal this idea. So, because Aaron is just divulging every bit of what this thing is to really just help us understand when something is to go in to a person, like what exactly this is. And so this item, I guess, is to be called a stem of sorts. That is to, like, it's kind of like in my thought process, it's kind of like nanotech, where it kind of helps do any. It seems to be a limitless kind of device that can kind of do anything, and so it's like, ooh, like things are heating up. Like it's like so they go and they see Aaron's like interesting gadget thing, and so after that we have both uh, Asha and Gray driving off in their in the car, that drives itself. And so it seems that we have these two characters driving in this self-driven car, and I'm like, when is the malfunction gonna happen? Because I had just seen the show called Upload, where it was an Amazon show, and so when watching that, I was like, okay, there's a car malfunction. If I haven't seen this movie before, like I would immediately just say there's going to be a car malfunction here, because with a self-driving car, it usually happens that there's a malfunction in it. Like, because I think that's the new thing to do now is to have like a self-driving car that malfunctions somewhere. Um, or someone else controls it, or like they end up having these detective shows where they go into that. Like I just saw like Stanley's Lucky Man's show where like that was an episode where somebody took control of a car and drove it off this like ledge and had two people drowned or something like that. So this car is to start to malfunction, and then Gray is to seat belt in Asha, and Gray doesn't have enough time to put a seatbelt upon his own self, and so the car flips over, and but it doesn't really seem like anyone is hurt at this point until we have certain guys coming in, a group of men who are to open the door of this car, cut Ash's seatbelt off of her, get her out of the car, as well as get out Gray. And so now we have these characters that are to be having like masks over their face, and they want to keep it that way because I guess there is to be these drones that are circling around, which I just like I started watching this movie, but I think I was kind of like I don't know how I felt about it. There's this movie named Night Raiders where like the Night Raiders had these like drone things, and I was like, okay, I don't quite understand what that was about, but it has something to do with drones, and they kept showcasing that a lot for some reason, but I didn't know what the movie was about. Plus, it was kind of like a long, drawn out movie where I'm like, oh, okay, so they're wasting a lot of time just kind of stretching this out to where we're gonna get to know these characters, but I don't know. So supposedly these guys got to keep masks on, or otherwise these drones can ID who these people are, and so we have one of the characters who I believe is to be Fisk take his mask off, but it seems we can also have been told later on that there are certain people that have the ability to hack into the system and be able to have their faces like kind of fuzzed out so you can't see who they actually are, because there's hackers out there that can basically do anything. So there wouldn't be any actual evidence of these people. So now Fisk is to be going and shooting Asha and killing her, and then they end up taking a gun, which we find out later is a medical tool, to uh, paralyze Gray. And so, since Gray cannot move, he is to see Asha bleeding out, and there's nothing he can do. There's no one he can call. It's not like there's a smartphone that's attached to his body or whichever. He's just to stand there while Asha is to bleed out. So, Gray is to be at this hospital where he, of course, is to be told that he is going to be paralyzed for the rest of his life. So Aaron is to drop by and is to tell him, it's like, well, hey, like, because of what happened to you, there's a possibility that I can give you a second chance in your life. Because what gets Gray to this hospital is he is to, after finding out what had happened to him, he ends up going home and is to be in this wheelchair because he goes back to the hospital. So there's kind of a circular thing here. So I'll get to that. So I'm going to go back around to that one moment where he meets up with Aaron. So Trey goes home, is in a wheelchair, and he has to have a house custom made to be able to fit his needs. And I guess with future tech, I think that's quite easy, I assume. So Gray is to be living with his mother, who is named Pamela. And so Gray is like, well, like, Ma, you don't have to go and take care of me. I have a whole house that can do that for me. And Pamela's like, well, like, I can still, like, help you. So there's some times where, like, Pamela is to just kind of do some, like, baths and, like, kind of, like, bed baths or whatever to Gray at some points. It seems that there are certain times where he is going to have to barf, maybe because of certain medications, and Pamela's helping him out with that. It's kind of gross, but it happens. So Gray is to try and inject himself with some PM medication, and then he keeps continuing to lie to the machine and having it dose him again and again and again until the devices say, I'm sorry, I can't give you any more medication. The next medication would be a lethal dose. And so that lands Gray back into the hospital because an ambulance had been called and so on and so forth. So when Gray is, of course, laying on this bed, Aaron comes to him wearing a mask, and Gray is like, "Hey, man, I'm not going to get you sick." And Aaron's just like, "Well, like, I don't get out very much." So Aaron is to mention to Gray that he has the tools to give Gray back his life, and Gray is to just be like, I'm not here to restart my life. I'm just looking for the off switch. And so Aaron is to say to Gray, it's like, well, really thinking about it, it's like, would that be a thing that Asha would have wanted for you not to have an opportunity to live again? Like, and so Aaron leaves, and Trey decides to go through this procedure that Aaron is to say that can give him back his life. So Gray goes on, does this procedure, has this tech being put into his spinal cord, spine. So Gray is to wake up and is to be in this wheelchair, and then like, okay, well, there might be a possibility that this is going to be a really slow process. And so Gray all of a sudden starts to be able to use his hand and lift his hand up, and then all of a sudden his other hand he can do the same thing. And so all of a sudden Aaron is like, hey man, like, try to walk now, see if you can stand up. So Trey can all of a sudden like be able to stand up and then start walking. And so now Aaron then gets Trey on a treadmill and see how like fast he can run. And so Trey is to quickly pick up the fact that he can kind of run really quickly. I'm like, wait a minute, like we have like muscle atrophy and all kinds of stuff going on here. And how is it that this thing can just quickly go and like make this body like perform the way it can? It just seems kind of like I don't know, but whatever. So Aaron is to tell Gray that no one can know that Gray is to have this procedure done and know that he can basically walk and do everything again. That he has to go back to what he was doing and like kind of be living what he was living for the most point until Aaron can get approval to have this all be done legitimately. And then like and then they can kind of come out with Gray being their first kind of test subject here. So Gray goes home, and so it seems that we get where someone is going to eventually have to know, right? Someone's going to have to know that uh, Gray is to be able to walk or move his hands or whatever. Uh, and that has to come down to his mother because his mother technically lives with him. So she figures it out, but she figures out much later in the film. She doesn't figure it out right away. And so then Trey has to tell her the truth of just like, well, like you're not supposed to know, but you know, so surprise. Like I have the ability of using my limbs again. Uh, like I also kind of like how like we have the camera movement here that's kind of moving with Gray's like movement, and it just kind of feels very like choppy, like the camera is actually moving with the character. And I liked those moments where like we really like uh, feel like this camera is like kind of mimicking a lot of stuff that Gray is doing as far as like motions and whatever. Plus, I also like how the fact that Gray has these kind of robotic like maneuvers. Not everything is to be this like smooth like this kind of thing. It's to be more like it's to be kind of more like this kind of thing where it's instead of a natural kind of thing. So I like that. It has a very kind of certain kind of approach to it. Everything is to have this kind of robotic kind of feel, um, more than so it being like a natural kind of thing. And I like that. So let's go on. So what Gray does is that he decides to go and start thumbing through the the kind of the records or kind of the stuff that he was given uh, from Detective Cortez, because Gray, before he went and did this procedure, he went to talk to Detective Cortez, who was to mention like, well, yeah, I like to do things the old-fashioned way too. I like to go and knock on doors, and I like to go and like be very active with my case and stuff like that. And so Gray is like, well, that's great and all, but not a single person has been caught from this. What's happening? Like, and so Gray wanted to come in there in person and is to ask like, what's the progress on this case? Why haven't you found anybody yet? And so Cortez is to mention it's like, well, it's not that easy. There's people that can hack and kind of blur people's faces. So we can't really find anybody who is to have been involved in this case. And so Gray is just like, wow. So Detective Cortez is to mention it's like, well, hey, if you can help me find who these people are, then we can go and get these guys. And so Gray is like, how can I even help you when I can't even move my hand? And so, yeah. So Detective Cortez is like, I guess, just washing this away as some cold case. And what if it would have been the fact that Gray would have not have gone and done any of this stuff that he was doing? What if he would have never gone into doing this whole like STEM procedural thing? Uh, like, man, would this have all just been a big, massive waste? But of course, we're gonna go into the other direction of things. So Gray is to go and get all these, like the video of his wife being killed. He gets all these kind of records and stuff that is to kind of tie into things. And so all of a sudden, Gray is to consistently be watching this video on some loop. And so Gray sits down as to hear a voice saying, like, can I mention something? And so Gray's like, what the heck was that? Who was talking just then? I was. Who are you? I'm STEM. So Gray is to say, wait a minute, like, am I going crazy? And Sim is like, no, you're not going crazy. And he's like, well, like, are you like, are you the thing that's in me? And it's like, well, yeah. It's like, well, like, do you have to talk? And he's like, well, do you want me to? He's like, no, don't talk. So the thing stops talking. And so Gray's like, okay, you can talk now. And so it's like, oh, hey, all right, well, you're not insane, and so like I'm just a thing that's inside you, and I can now talk to you because I am having a thing of dialogue through your eardrum, so that way we can talk. So basically, Gray has like an artificial intelligence like inside of him that is to also be like this ninja at some point, because Gray will say like, you didn't realize I was a ninja. So Gray is to say like, okay, like what is it that you saw that I didn't? And so Gray goes closer and closer into the video to have the STEM go and see that one of the guys had some arm tattoo that was to be this military tattoo. And so the STEM goes and recreates the tattoo and has STEM draw it out. And so uh, Gray is to realize that they have evidence of one of the killers and that he had a military tattoo. And so STEM is to tell Gray, because Gray is tempted to just call the detective, and STEM is to say, it's like, well, how are we even sure that these people are the people that, uh, like, how are we sure that, like, we can convince the detective that these are the people? Like, we'd have to go and check for ourselves and then go and come back with our results to this detective so we can be absolutely sure. Plus, also, Stem is to realize that there was to have been the guy that shot Asha that didn't actually have a gun in his hand. He had some arm prosthetic that was to have shot this woman, and so he narrowed down like the arm implant, and so now we have uh, like kind of two people, and so the first thing that Gray is to go and find is a guy named Cirque. So Gray is to go to where Cirque is to live and is to thumb through his home. Just start to go through and look through his home to just kind of see like off of this table there's certain messages, and so a bunch of the messages is to mention a bar called Old Bones that has no address, and so Gray, of course, is to realize that. Let me pause here for a second. All right. Because I was just hearing this weird, like, bee kind of freaking in my ear. So I was just like, bleh. I was trying to, like, work that out. So, Gray goes on and meets with Cirque. And so, or, bleh. Gray goes to Cirque's house and is to go and thumb through his messages that are on his table. And Cirque goes back into the home where uh, where Stem is telling Gray that he needs to go and if he's gonna attack him, do it now. Like while Cirque doesn't know he's there to get the element of surprise. So all of a sudden, Gray is to start having to fight with Cirque, and Gray doesn't have any kind of skill to really combat Cirque. So, to avoid dying, Stem makes uh, the option for Gray to give him permission for Gray to be able to dodge and to be able to figure out how to take down Cirque. And so Stem needs, of course, Gray's permission. And Gray is like, permission granted. And here's where we start to see, of course, Gray is just starting to go and beat up freaking this guy. And so Cirque has this knife, and so uh, we get to where Gray is so good at dodging this knife and grabs it and gets it from him, to where Gray goes and stabs Cirque, and we have this point where like we have Gray who's like smashing plates on Cirque, and it's a really fun element where we have like Gray who is like reacting to this as if he's like this is an out of body experience, and he's just like, oh my god, like he's beating him up. He's like, oh my god, like he's reacting to all this, and I find it hilarious. I find this scene so good. So Gray is to tell, of course, Cirque to just, hey man, just stay down. But Cirque just keeps on trying to go at going at Gray to where it forces Gray to then have Stem kill this man by taking this blade and basically crushing this guy's jaw, or crushing this guy's like face and killing him off by putting a blade in his mouth and then just kind of forcing it as far back as he can possibly do to break bones and whatever. So because of course Gray is now very strong compared to what he, I guess, was at some point. So but I said the word like stem. I think at some point they ended up calling it a widget for whatever goofy reason. Uh, that a widget was supposedly inside of Gray at some point, but the widget ends up calling itself stem weirdly. So now that Cirque is dead, and the next thing for them to uh, think of what to do is to go to this old bones bar, and so that's the next step of things. But it's kind of interesting because Gray was to kill this guy, and then he was to go on and barf into the sink, and then so Stem is like, uh, Gray, I think we need to go and remove all of the evidence that you were here, even the vomit that's in this sink. And so Gray is like, well, yeah, but like, give me like a second. And so, like, Gray waits a second. He's like, a second has passed. It's like, no, just give me a minute here. Just give me some time before you just start rattling off things. And Stem's like, okay. So Gray is like, okay, how are we going to do this then? And so Stem is to mention, like, well, he needs to wipe off everything that he has ever touched. And so Gray is to be like, well, how am I even going to know every single thing that I've ever touched? And so Stem is like, well, I've recorded every single thing that you've ever touched. So, like, you'll know exactly every single thing that you've touched here. So they now go and they wipe this place clean, and so they head off into uh, the old Bones location. And while there seemingly is to be deaths collected, we also have Detective Cortez. Is that the right name? Yeah. Luckily, I got that right off the bat, right? Feels good. So, Detective Cortez is to start having bodies pile up, and so immediately she is to have suspicions excuse me, tied to Gray, and when she goes to Gray, it's like, hey, I think you might have quite possibly been tied to these murders, and Gray is like, I'm sorry, that's gonna be a little bit hard to believe. Like, how am I gonna be able to go and kill any of these people? It seems kind of weird, right? So Gray goes off to this old bones bar and is to go to this bar and try to get a drink. And so there's to be one guy helping him drink this drink. And so Stem is telling Gray, and also, like, Gray is the only one that can hear Stem because he says that. It's like, well, like, because no one else can hear Stem's voice. So Gray is to mention that he like Stem is to only remember certain zeros and ones and binary and whatever, where, and that's to be like his kind of brain, where in Gray's brain, all that he remembers is his bad decisions, and hence why, like, impairing his judgment is to be a good thing right here, because Gray might go off to have to kill yet another person, so he might as well be seemingly impaired one way or another about all this. So Gray just goes on and is to just ask everyone in this bar, hey guys, if you have any tying to a guy named Cirque, and you've killed my wife, hey, let me know. Let me know if you guys were a murderer at some point, right? So all of a sudden this big, massive of a man called Tolan is to come up to Gray and now wants to take him into this bathroom where he can uh, go on and have a private conversation with him. And so they take of course Gray here and place him onto the ground away from his wheelchair. And so Toland is to want to figure out where exactly is the sweet spot for uh, Gray to where he starts to feel some kind of something somewhere. So that way, if they kind of get to torture him or get to do whatever to him, then that might be the sweet spot to go and do that. So Toland is to of course like say that like there's no way that this guy could have killed that guy from before. And so Gray is like, well, yeah, man, I basically crushed your friend's face and I'll do the same thing to you. So now we have where uh, Gray goes and gets up and starts having to fight all these guys because now there is a group of guys instead of just Tolan. And so Gray is to go and take all these guys down. And then so Gray is to have a knife with him, which he gets. And so Gray is to want to go and torture Tolan for information. And so Gray is to tell Stem before they get there that he doesn't want to kill anybody again. And so Gray goes to this situation where he's having to torture some guy. He's like, I don't want to do this. And so Stem is like, well, hey, like, you don't even have to look, and I can easily be able to, like, do this torture and force this guy to answer everything that you want him to. So we have Gray who's like, okay, sure, go ahead and do that. So Sam is just slicing and dicing this guy up, and then he stops. He's like, okay, he'll answer any questions that you have. So Gray starts asking him about who he works for and who was to have put this whole thing together. And so, or why they were doing what they're doing, or like who he was connected to with this job, so on and so forth. Uh, so Toland is to mention that his name is Toland and that uh, the the money was coming from a guy named Fisk, and who was to be one of the guys who was to have shot Asha, I believe. So the whole thing of this is it was some job by someone. And so Tobin, we find out Tobin is also connected to the Cobalt Company, which is actually Asha's company. So we're kind of assuming that this could have been some kind of company job where they wanted Asha eliminated. And so Gray got caught in the crossfire of it all. So that's what we're kind of thinking here. So so Gray is to go on to the next person, who is to basically be Fisk at this point, because there's only so many people really left. But before that, when Gray was to kill the very first person, he had gone to Aaron's place, and Aaron was very upset with Gray and said like, "Hey man, like, uh, don't you think that I would have some kind of uh, like figuring out where you've gone, where you're heading, where you're whatever? Don't you think that I would have like a way to keep tabs on you?" And so Stem was to say that Gray should tell Aaron the truth because he knows everything. And so Gray is to say, it's like, well, you never told me that this STEM character has a voice, that it can talk to me and whatever. And so Aaron is just be like, well, like, okay, like I didn't tell you that, but because he didn't know, he didn't realize that that could actually be a thing. So Aaron is kind of warning that if Gray is to decide to continue to do this detective work, this side detective work that he should not be doing, then Aaron will be forced to shut him down and have him just kind of be left for his company to go and pick him up to then remove all of this from his body and to just kill this project. So Aaron is to, or Aaron, uh, Gray is to, of course, be in this second situation where now Aaron is to be wanting to kill off Gray's body and to seize this stem from working. And so now Gray goes into his wheelchair to try to head out of this bar. And so Gray now has to leave his wheelchair to run to this specific location that is going to have this hacker, so that way Gray can get seemingly back control to keep using, uh, of course, STEM without having Aaron being able to pull the plug at some point. So Aaron is to pull the plug, and to slowly but surely, Gray is starting to lose control of his body, to where he's basically dragging himself to this hacker's place, some hacker called Jamie. So Gray had put all of this stuff onto his arm of what STEM wants Gray to do, and so when Gray makes it to this place, Jamie can't even read what this thing is on this guy's arm. And so Gray is to mention that STEM was to say to take out certain guards and stuff like that out of the out of this computer, and which is just basically him now at this point. So Jamie goes off and starts to hack through this computer and does exactly what he asks. And so then the girl is to run off while, of course, Gray has no control over his body, and Fisk and a guy who is to be I don't know the other guy's name. Wen? It's either Wen or it's Jeff. Not sure which. So Fisk and this guy who is to be able to put these bullets into his arm to, I guess, be like a assassin with a weapon upon his hand, is to like break into here and is trying to take Gray and kill him. So Gray is slowly but surely being able to start using control of certain parts of his body, and so we get into a fight between the armed gunman and Gray, and what ends up happening here is that uh, Gray is to be so strong compared to this guy that Gray is to use this guy's arm against him and is to shoot himself in the head using his own weapon. So now Gray is looking for Fisk, and Fisk is long gone. And so Gray is to go on and track down Fisk. And so when Gray does find where Fisk is, uh, we have them fighting it out. But here's the funny thing, it seems that both Fisk and Gray are on equal footing at this point. And so Fisk, when he goes to the old Bones bar, he sneezes on the bartender, and this sneeze goes and puts these nanites into this guy's brain and starts slicing and dicing it up and killing him off. Because the bartender was going and putting a gun into either one of them's face, leading uh, Fist to just easily kill this guy off. So Fisk wasn't going to use that kind of weapon to take down, of course, Gray. And before Gray was to get to Fisk, he had to go and deal with Detective Cortez yet again. Because Gray was going to leave off to go and get Fisk, and when he makes it back home, that's when his mother finds out, oh my god, you can walk. And so Gray has to explain all this. And so when Detective Cortez is to make her way again back home to see, of course, Gray, she implants some listening device in his coat. And then she leaves. We also had the one spot where Detective Cortez was wanting to go and buy Gray's car, and Gray's like, no, like, I worked too much on it. It has sentimental value. I'm never going to sell it. And she's like, are you sure about that? Like, I could really use a car like this. It's like, I don't think so. So, but Detective Cortez was really just kind of doing some investigating, trying to see like certain like uh, like the soles of Gray's boots or something like that that could possibly match or have her kind of figure out uh, if really Gray is to be hiding something. So Gray is to go is to spot, of course, Gray driving. And so she's like, aha, I caught you. So now there's nothing for STEM to help Gray out in this situation because both of them are driving in cars that are to be the old fashioned way of doing things, which is just gas and pedals and whatever. So STEM comes up with an idea to use uh, a car that isn't to be old fashioned and is to be uh, a a controlled kind of car. And so STEM crashes this one car in front of Detective Cortez's car to stop her from getting to Gray. So Gray goes off and is to fight Fisk, and they're matching themselves punch for punch and move for move, and there's nothing that Gray can do to stop uh, stop Fisk because we have them just so evenly matched that STEM can't do anything. So we have Fisk, who is to basically say that Gray is just like him. Like basically they're both one and the same. And Fisk doesn't really want to kill Gray because they both are to be having like these tech things inside of them. And so since they can't go and fight one another, it eventually leads to having Gray. God, how did Fist die? There's always one kind of thing where I usually have some kind of problem with how one character dies in a film. It always comes down to that. Uh, I think with uh, let me pause here for 1 second. All right, so winding it up, rewinding it up. I was like, okay, like since like I was like, there's no way to beat him physically. There has to be some kind of emotional compromise that kind of goes on here where this guy doesn't have the thought process of thinking everything through. So Gray is to like hear Fisk talking how like Fisk was getting paid to do this from somebody. So like it doesn't end with Fisk, it goes on to someone else. And so Fisk is to mention that he was paid to have uh, Gray get his implant into him. So Fisk goes on and is to break down how like why the whole thing was to do what he did. And so now that Gray can't beat Fisk physically, finally Gray is to go into the fact that Cirque was to actually be Fisk's brother and is to uh, basically tease him with the fact that, like, yeah, I freaking killed your brother, and like you whine like a little baby, and this and that, forcing Fisk to not really be thinking and just having to just now try and fight Gray out of rage, and so uh, Gray takes advantage of that and takes Fisk and pushes his head down um, into this glass that I guess had broken, and like so Fisk dies that way through some kind of impaling of the back of his head. So after that moment, of course, Gray is to go off and he is to realize that it had to have been Aaron at this point because the only person that was to have wanted him to get this implant, of course, was Aaron. So follow the trail of breadcrumbs. So Gray goes back to Aaron's place and is to ask him why. And so by the time that Gray is to be there with Aaron, Cortez is to make it to Aaron's place and is to hold a gun on Gray. And so what happens is that we kind of start to have Stem taking control of Gray a little bit more, because we've consistently had Gray having Stem consistently take control of him anyways, because Gray is just allowing this to happen, and then Gray is to kind of be overly confident about these things, even in the fight in the bathroom, where Gray is starting to fight Tolan and start to get overly confident about how he can just start beating people up. So Gray is to go on and take Detective Cortez and is to start to choke her. And Gray is like, I don't want to do this. Like, I don't want to hurt this girl. And it's like, well, like, it's either you or her. You gotta pick. So, uh, Gray goes on and gives up the hold of Cortez, but then Stem is to say that he's been having real legitimate control over Gray this whole time and has just allowed him to really have control of his body. And so Stem goes and grabs this knife and stabs it into his own hand, which of course makes Gray like scream because like he felt that. So Aaron is to tell Gray that he hasn't had control over his company in years and that he's basically been doing whatever Stem is to tell him to do. Everything that everything that Aaron was to tell Gray when he was in that hospital bed was Stem feeding him this information of what to say word for word. So Aaron hasn't basically Aaron is to be a slave uh to whatever Stem wants. So Gray is to go off and via control of Stem and stab Aaron in the head with a knife that was already in Gray's hand. And so after this moment, Aaron all of a sudden is to be in his head, and he is now talking to Asha, and we have a moment where Asha is to say, like, oh, hey, like, you finally awoke, you sleepyhead. Like, yeah, like, everything's fine. Like, yeah, we just got into some car accident. I guess, like, they were to play to the fact that Gray might have been sleeping this whole time. That everything that he was to have been dreaming was all fake. And we're like, oh, this is kind of an interesting ending. That we can just kind of wash this all off as a dream and that everything is okay. And Gray never went off to be this stem thing. But then all of a sudden, we realize that this whole thing with Gray waking up in this hospital isn't real. That Gray's mind had just broken, and now Gray's part of his Gray and Gray's subconscious is now living this weird dream, and Stem has completely taken over Gray's body and is now going off to kill Cortez, and then going off to do whatever the heck else it wants to do next. So that's the way that it just kind of rattles off this movie and finishes it off. Uh, I have fun with this film, like especially the ending where I'm like, oh my god, because like they gave that like those that kind of like the ending that you would have wanted to just be like, oh no, like this isn't real, it was all a dream and whatever, and it's like the perfect thing and whatever. but then you find out it's like, oh no, like Stem took over. Stem took over Gray, and now there's not going to be a sequel out of this because what is it just going to be like the robotic Gray just going and killing more people? And to see how Gray advances to a much more mechanical being at some point. So, with that said, I think that's all I wanted to say about this movie. I'm going to get out of here so I can go and have this be the last video for this day until I do more stuff, more videos possibly lined up after this one. I don't know. We'll see how that all breaks down. But I'm going to get out of here. Goodbye, everybody. Bye, everybody.